welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Turn the Page. I'm your host today, Jen, and I am here today with the writer of a fantastic, absolutely fantastic graphic novel. It was such a great read, and it taught me so much about the ongoing issue of book bans and censorship. It is an absolutely fascinating slice of 2013 history, which hurts me to refer to as history, but I think it is at this point. So without further ado, welcome. Could I ask you to introduce yourself and your book, please?
Hello, Jen. Thanks for having me. My name is Jarrett Dapier, and I am the author of the just released today, Wake Now in the Fire, a graphic novel that I wrote and it is illustrated by AJ Dungo. It's subtitled A Story of Censorship, Action, Love, and Hope. I'm really excited to be here, especially on release day. It's a great way to celebrate it.
Yay, thank you so much. It's an honor to spend release day with you. And as we hop into talking about the book, first, let's talk a little bit about your career and your writing journey.
Sure. So I'm also a librarian in addition to writing for kids and teens. And I started working in libraries in 2009. And since 2009 until 2021, I worked almost exclusively with teens. I was first at the Evanston Public Library, which is in my hometown of Evanston, Illinois. And then I worked at the Skokie Public Library, just west of there. And now I work at the Niles Main District Library, which is just west of Skokie. And now I work with children and teens, but primarily kids through eighth grade. I'm a school librarian, doing outreach to classes and libraries around Niles, and we have a lot of unincorporated areas that I like to visit so I can catch all the kiddos that are out there. But I started my career really started when it comes to fighting for First Amendment rights and protecting the freedom to read. It really started when I was hired at the ACLU of Illinois. Um, and that was a couple years out of undergrad. I was a legal assistant on the First Amendment Rights Project, the Reproductive Rights Project, and the Racial Justice Project. And I could go into some of the big cases we worked on and how we're still seeing battles being conducted over them today. But in focusing on my career in the book, when after working at ACLU, I started working in these Times magazine in Chicago. I was an assistant publisher, and I also got the chance to write interviews, people that I pitched to them. I interviewed Walter Dean Myers, Ian Mackay of Fugazi, and then the 2008 crash hit, which almost decimated in these Times. Unfortunately, it did not, and it actually rose stronger than ever a few years later. But I needed another job, and I stumbled across, thanks to my wife, a listing for a teen readers advisor at the Evanston Library. And as soon as I started that job, everything in my life clicked. From my love of reading and writing, my care for teens and their rights, especially their First Amendment rights and their rights to read, their literature, so many different things. Everything about it felt right. And I never left libraries. So I went to grad school for a year and a half in the middle there. And that's where the genesis for this book took place, but didn't actually complete it until just a few years ago. So it's out now in 2026, which is 10 years after I first completed the original work on the book. But yeah, that's kind of my journey as a librarian. And then as a writer, I have three picture books out: Mr. Watson's Chickens, Jazz for Lunch, and The Most Haunted House in America, which you'll be shocked to learn is the White House.
That's a really fascinating journey. And it's a story that seems to have a lot of resonance for me, certainly, but for a lot of librarians who it seems like come to it as like a sort of second or third thing that you kind of do in your life. And it makes a kind of sense that, for me, when I looked back, I'm like, why didn't I do that 15 years ago? That would have made things easier. But, so here we are.
Yeah, I'm really glad actually that I didn't come to libraries until I did. Number one, like to your point, I wouldn't have earlier because I had other ambitions. I had other ideas about myself and about different professions out there. But I was very glad I came to it when I did because I had spent my 20s doing these interesting things. I was making a living either in, Progressive Magazine or at the ACLU. I had a daughter, which was a huge life experience. And then also, I'm a drummer and also a theater performer, former theater performer. And I did a lot of performing and directing around Chicago. And all of these things I was able to bring to bear on my work as a teen librarian. And I'm sure your listeners won't be shocked to hear that because I often say the best librarians are the ones who bring a ton of experience and interests into the library. And that's not to knock people who go straight from undergrad into grad school, but the best of those people who do that have a ton of other interests. Colleague right now, Allie, she's very young in terms of the profession, but is an incredible illustrator, has interest in dancing and short story writing. I mean, like she's just eternally curious. So people with the experience and the curiosity, I think, make the best librarians.
Mm. Yeah, I think learning how to learn something, makes you a good librarian. And when you can then transfer those skills to help transfer those skills to somebody else, I think that, yeah.
That is perfectly put. That's it. Yeah.
Cool. So I'm very interested to hear that this graphic novel started in your master's research.
Yeah.
What was the process of, boiling down so much research and so much, I imagine, jargon heavy professional type academic writing into something that's, accessible to a wide age range and people from a lot of backgrounds?
Yeah, so that was really it. So I tried really hard not to make my original thesis paper on this subject very, very academic sounding. I wanted it to flow almost like a New Yorker piece, or I think my wife said when she read it that it read like something she'd read in the Chicago Reader. So it's like accessible, but it really presents all the research thoroughly and the story thoroughly. It was for a class called Literacy, Reading, and Readers, which I absolutely loved. And we had to pick, we had to pick a topic that tied in with any of our weeks of topics that we investigated for this final thesis. And like I said, I've always been passionate about censorship issues, First Amendment rights of teens. I worked with teens for 5 years before grad school. So, and even when I was at ACLU and in these times, I always trended towards teen topics. So, like interviewing Walter Dean Myers, or when I was at ACLU, if there were any calls or letters that came in about like a student journalist's rights being, trampled, or cops abusing teenagers and stories that we got, I took them straight to it was this one attorney, Adam, and I'd always be like, Adam, I have another story here. And it was kind of funny because we couldn't take most cases that came our way, but I always made sure to put those ahead of most other calls I got. Anyways, in 2013, I was at the Evanston Library and I started watching as the news about Persepolis by Marjane Satrapi, the graphic novel. I watched it unfold on Twitter while I was sitting at the service desk in the teen space. And it was news about the banning, people's reaction to the news about the banning, and then also students announcing their protests that they organized for that Friday. So this was, I think, Wednesday night, and the act of censorship it took place at one particular high school that really activated everybody on Tuesday. So it was Tuesday it took place. Wednesday, I'm already hearing about it on social media. Friday, they had a protest of something like 80 to 100 people in the rain in a very visible corner in Chicago. And they brought national and international media attention to the issue. And I followed it closely. I did my part as librarian. I put, our copies of Persepolis front and center in the space, which they were then checked out by Saturday. It was great. But I never felt satisfied by Chicago Public Schools' answers when they were asked, how could you do this? Why would there be a directive that this particular book or any book should be removed from every school in the system? I mean, we're talking over 550 schools, and they're saying this book is so dangerous, it can't be in classes or libraries. And so their answer was, at the time, the head of schools was named Barbara Bird Bennett, and she said, I have no idea what this is about. I had nothing to do with it, and it's probably the result of miscommunication. And we're not in the business of censoring. So next question. And she really tried to, smack it down whenever it came up. And it kind of went away pretty fast for them. That said, the teens and their protests and the egg they threw on the face of Chicago public school administration did battle back the censorship order. Not completely. They kind of issued a mealy-mouthed directive about seventh and eighth graders can't read it. And if you're going to teach it in freshman, sophomore year, a teacher needs special training to teach Persepolis. But ultimately, they saved the books, and it was beautiful. And but a year later, I thought I was going to write a paper about teen reading communities and how censorship affects them. And then I realized I didn't want to make it about a bunch of different case studies. And I just wanted to focus on this because I was like, I want the whole timeline and answer the questions if I can, who, what, where, when, how, because that was never answered. Even when the ALA filed a FOIA request for documentation, they got 8 pages back that were mostly all redacted. And then CPS said, that's all there is. So I set to work and I wanted to focus on primary sources. So I was interviewing teens who were a part of the protest, teens who remembered the whole incident and how it went down, teens who were fans of Persepolis. And then I discovered that there was, before the ban came down, a banned books club at that high school called the 451 Banned Books Club. I talked to the founder of that. I talked to the girl who became vice president of it after the protests, but hadn't been a part of it before. And then lots of teachers and librarians. And so I just got like great material. And these kids were incredible. They still are in their passion, but also their principled stance against not just removing books, but one of them, the founder of that banned books club, even said things like, this is such an insult to the expertise and professionalism of my teachers. How dare they just take away something that they very specifically decided should go in our curriculum for our benefit? So it's funny. I always say I'm stunned by teens when I hear them speak out, and yet I'm not, because almost every time they are not given the credit that they deserve for how truthfully they see things and how truthfully they express themselves when they're speaking out. So I ended up writing it sort of like a piece, like you'd read a sort of narrative. And then I filed a FOIA of my own that asked for just notes related to one meeting I saw in the original FOIA documents, where they referenced a meeting where the directive was given to remove the books. And I just said, I'm a grad student, and I just want some notes if there are any to this one meeting. I'm no threat. I'm nothing. And I didn't expect anything. I had to turn in my paper. I was like, okay, well, that's done. Semester's over. And then like 2 days before Christmas, I received 43 pages of emails from CPS, almost all redacted. But I learned from my time at the ACLU that there are ways to permanently redact something and ways to incorrectly redact something, especially for case filings. They did it incorrectly, and I was able to highlight all of their black bars and just remove them. So I had everything. And what did I learn? I learned that they totally lied. It was a directive given by the head of schools, Barbara Byrd Bennett, on a group email about one copy that was found in one elementary school classroom on the west side of Chicago. And that person was saying, hey, I found this book in this one classroom I was visiting. Can I remove it? And then she shared a scan of the page where a political prisoner is tortured and then murdered. And Barbara Byrd Bennett's response almost immediately was, absolutely, get it out of there. And while we're at it, remove it from every single school. And there's no curiosity, there's no debate or conversation about, wait, is this a book that's used elsewhere? Turns out it was an approved text on the Department of Literacy's curriculum guide since 2005. And really it exposed them in a lot of lies. So I shared it with the media, with ALA. But then I didn't feel done with it. And I thought there's so many great scenes, so many great characters, and my mind is still racing with all this imagery. What if I turned it into a graphic novel? And there began my odyssey towards publication. which originally I thought it was going to be maybe a zine. Then I thought maybe I'll self-publish it or do a Kickstarter. And then a few years later, I got an agent for my picture books and I pitched this to her and she said, write that right now. And so I got to work. But yeah, adapting it from the original wasn't, I don't want to say it wasn't hard. It's just, it didn't feel like a question I couldn't crack or like a puzzle I couldn't crack. I just started with some of the scenes that I was told about from the teens and I just started writing. That's a long way of answering your question, but
But fascinating. Thank
that's the
you.
story.
The scope of the teens organization and their activism is really stunning. And in a lot of ways, it's funny because when I was in grad school for my library degree, I wrote a research paper about the library at the Occupy Wall Street movement.
Mhm.
And this sort of feels like in some little ways, like a little like a teen counterpart to that sort of like grassroots development that was really kind of like hitting around the 2010s into the, 2020s. It was just like really heartening to read that they understood these issues so clearly and really knew, had a really canny sense of both what to do and how to bring attention to what they were doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just recently, I've been talking about this story for years because even when I, was just had the research out, I was invited to library science classes to talk about, the example of these kids and what it taught us about collection development policies and reconsideration policies and other issues surrounding censorship or reconsiderations. And but what I didn't realize until recently is that one thing that really compelled me all along was how quickly they activated. And when we see now this just inferno of book bannings and censorship running rampant across our country, and how slow sensible-minded adults in the public have been to appreciate the problem and the crisis of it, um, it's unbelievable. It's exceptional. They did it within days. And so that's in a lot of ways, I realized a model for what when people ask me, what do you want people to take from this book? Partially, I'd love them to see the swiftness with which these kids reacted, which speaks to a couple things. I think they'd already been trained in critical thinking, thinking for themselves, and the importance of the freedom to read. And so they could put those principles into action as soon as they saw this threatened. And so when kids aren't exposed to that kind of education, I think it can have a really deleterious effect on a whole school community. But these kids, one of them told me she couldn't bear the idea of not speaking up because what if a seventh grader is watching us do nothing about them taking this book and learning that, oh, I guess it's not a big deal. And so she felt compelled on behalf of younger students, which there were many, many examples like that of the ways that they activated and the motivations behind them that inspired me absolutely.
I'm curious about how fictionalizing the story to the degree that you do came into play. How do you sort of like, I imagine a lot of your characters who are also like warm and fully developed and really interesting characters with rich interior lives. I imagine that they are somewhat like maybe composite figures of people that you talk to, but like how did you go into rather like taking all the stories that you heard and making them into fictional characters?
So except for one teen that I interviewed, I did none of the personal stories of the characters in the book are in any way based on anyone real. So they're all complete fiction. I got the idea for a couple situations from actually situations that I learned about affecting teens when I was at ACLU, just some stories I'd carried with me. But they all draw in many ways from my own experiences, either with mental health issues and I mean my own experiences as in family and friends, as well as my own struggles. I applied a lot of those to them and also my memories of being a teenager, being in high school. They are always front and center for me. So it's not hard for me to just immediately exist in that sphere again. That said, one of the characters, her name is Aditi in the book, she has a backstory about checking out books at the library in Mumbai, where she was born and grew up until she moved to Chicago when she was 8 or 9. And her story about sort of gaming the system because she was only allowed one checkout per day and she wanted to read more. And so she would go check out a book. Um, she would go in the morning, check out a book, and then she knew there was a shift change at noon. And so the new people in the afternoon didn't know she'd already checked out a book. And so she would check out her second one, and then she'd do pick a longer one so she could read it overnight and then do it all again the next day. And I said to her, I have to put that story in this book. It's so wonderful. And the the person that it's based on said absolutely that's okay and has been a big supporter of the book for a long time. And that whole story is verbatim from the person I interviewed when she was about 18 years old. And but other than that, everything else either comes from my life or yeah, there are some composites, but they're not actually in any way related to any of the teens I interviewed for the research. That said, when it comes to what is true and what's not, how the book was removed, how teachers and librarians protected it, the timeline of how it went down that week, all of that through the library sit-in that gets canceled at the start of the second part. All of that is exactly how it happened. It's all true. Um, so almost like from a librarian standpoint, it is its own case study in seeing like how it all unfolded so fast. Um, but yeah, the personal stories of love and friendship and different, conflicts, those are fiction.
Those conflicts really, inform the characters and drive the story in a lot of ways. But I wonder also, like, is there a little bit of like, how would I phrase this? Guidance for people who want to do similar activism? Because I feel like especially there were some conflicts. Oh my gosh, I can't remember who it is now, but in the organization of the various forms of protest, there's some conflict in between two of the leaders, and it's causes a lot of like, defensiveness and some bad feelings. But ultimately those are overcome. And it emerges from something that I think this generation is really good at, which is like understanding how their positionality kind of influences where they're coming from and where their peers are coming from. So like, yeah, was there some of that perhaps driving your writing as well?
Yes, and thank you for noticing that about like current teens and their incredible ability to be sensitive communicators. I was talking with a teen a couple weeks ago who was going through a breakup with her boyfriend, and she was telling me about their breakup where they took turns saying what they feel about their relationship and what they want, and then the other person would then talk back what they think the person is saying as they understood it. And then they would go back and forth. And I was like, how are you like 45-year-olds in couples counseling when you're 18 years old? But so the conflict in the book between Aoife and Kendall, I wanted to show a couple things, which is they have a really strong friendship. Um, but in the sort of, there's always in protests, and I think in any kind of organizing, pride can get in the way in harmful ways and can undermine the effectiveness of a protest. And Aoife's pride and Kendall's pride seem to sort of limit their communication with each other. And each of them have an excuse or reason why they did that. Like Kendall, for example, puts up posters before Aoife sees them. But in Kendall's defense, they didn't have a lot of time and she felt like she needed to get them up right away and she didn't feel like she needs Aoife's approval. But then Aoife was really belittling Kendall's style. Kendall has a very comedic style and wants to lampoon powers that be and is really good at it. And Aoife thinks that that's too silly and not effective as a protest angle. And it made her think that maybe Kendall wasn't serious enough to organize, which isn't true. Um, as a team, they work really well together, it turns out. But their conflict is over, who's controlling this, and one of the characters, takes control in a meeting with the principal that offends the other. and they really have it out with each other. And Kendall is really upset with Aoife. Aoife's upset with Kendall and sort of insulting her. But Aoife is dealing with really, really dysfunctional situation at home. A father who he overdoses and is struggling with alcoholism and pain pills. And she's basically his parent and is taking care of him as so many kids have to do for parents with addiction problems. And that's a huge weight on her. And so, in her own way, I think Aoife, similarly to Kendall, was thinking, I don't have time for all this silliness either, because I can barely get this protest off the ground and try to keep my dad from destroying himself. And so she's carrying a lot of weight and stress. So she's not considering Kendall and vice versa. But what's wonderful is when they finally make up. It's one of my favorite scenes when they sort of both express their deeper conflicts and their deeper feelings and realize, oh, this isn't an end of a friendship. This is just kind of friendship tested in the fires of an extreme situation.
Yeah, it really captures the sort of glorious messiness of the teen years, because when we're teens, we do sort of have like very quick reactions that we haven't quite learned how to regulate entirely yet, if we ever do. Uh,
Right.
we have really strong egos, but we're also really, as we were just saying, like these teens are really good at expressing their feelings and sort of using their words to overcome these sorts of differences in opinion and viewpoint. It was really inspiring to see, and I think it gave me a lot of even more hope for the next generation than I already had.
Well, that's great. I mean, I like to say that every character is inspired just by my working with so many teens over, 15 years. They are open and thoughtful and considerate and not anything like the stereotypes and cliches that the media really wants adults to sort of accept. The media in the mainstream world, I think, they want to both be friends with teens and at the same time sell them things, but also have authoritarian control over them. And um, I think that that's a terrible mix. It's mixed messages. It's also just disrespectful, I think. And we should listen to them a lot more because they are all the things that you just mentioned and more.
Yeah.
And I think it's another reason mainstream adult society rejects them is because teens hold up a mirror to the society we've created, and people don't like mirrors when they're held up to them.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. They haven't learned complacency yet, so it's much more urgent.
Exactly.
Yeah. Do you think you'll write another graphic novel? What's on the horizon for you?
Oh, definitely. So I've already written another one. It's not entirely finished, but it's really digging deep into the experience of a boy who's traumatized by a active shooter drill in first grade and who then in middle school still hasn't shaken it and has really it's really spun out into an anxiety disorder that causes him to refuse going to school, be afraid of it, and beg his parents to to try and find some way to solve this or do something. Like, what can we do? Um, the thing is, he doesn't want to get involved in protesting again. Like, he's a seventh grader. It scares him. His love is birding and peregrine falcons. And so there's sort of a relationship between I want my habitat, which is home and school, kept safe. Meanwhile, I want to keep the habitats of these birds that I love safe. And there's a relationship because everything's connected between those two sort of examples. And I really would love to show, how we have not done anywhere near an adequate job making kids feel safe at school because of our love of guns and violence. So, and how it's really dedicated to exploring how that really affects a kid on a emotional level in really important years. And then there are two characters that were cut out of Wake Now in the Fire that I intend to give their own book. They're seen briefly. They're the two who they create a sort of like paper mache big Persepolis book to carry at the protest, but I had written, little known fact is that this used to be 200, almost 250 pages longer than it is. So that's a lot of things cut out. And they had a lot of scenes together that I really love that sort of shot off in other directions, but still related to groups of people and communities fighting to make the world better for everybody.
Nice. Well, those sound like fascinating projects. I can't wait to see them. Thank you so much for taking the time to share your book with us, especially on publication day, at this big day. I'm so excited for the world to see this one. Thank you.
Thank you, Jen. It was a pleasure being here.
Thanks. So, listeners, please check out Wake Now in the Fire, a story of censorship, action, love, and hope. It is available today and it will be available when you hear this in 2 days. So, head to your favorite library, bookstore, comic book store, website, wherever you like to go. Do you have a favorite place you like to send people for books?
Always bookshop.org if they want to, if they must,
Mm.
sort of order from a mass online retailer, but also don't forget that plenty of bookstores all over the nation will ship you books. So I love Left to Bank Books. I love Semicolon in Chicago, and my local shop is Booked here in Evanston. I don't know if they ship, but there are options all over, and indie is always best, in my opinion.
Absolutely. I ask that because I'm compiling, a list of bookshop tourism for my future travel. So thank you very
Oh,
much.
I love that.
Okay, listeners, thank you for joining us as well. It is now time to close this chapter. We'll see you next time.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.